Run your tongue across your back teeth. Feel that? Ridges, little peaks and valleys, sharp enough to tear meat. 4,500 years ago, a man walked out of a mud brick barracks in the shadow of the Great Pyramid, and his back teeth were flat, smooth as river stones. In some of them, worn down so far that the nerve inside was open to the air. He was maybe 30 years old. And it wasn't the stone that did that to him. It wasn't dust from the quarry or sand off the plateau. It was his lunch. Stay with this, because by the end you'll understand something that sounds impossible. The Great Pyramid was not built out of limestone. It was built out of bread and beer. And the story about that beer, the one printed in textbooks for nearly 100 years, turned out to be wrong. Start with the number everyone quotes. Roughly 2.5 million blocks of stone, stacked into a shape so precise it stayed the tallest structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years. Everyone asks how they moved the stone. Almost nobody asks what those people ate. And that's the harder question. Stone doesn't need feeding. Stone doesn't get hungry at dawn. Somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people were living on that plateau, and every one of them woke up empty every single morning for roughly 20 years. That's the real engineering problem at Giza, not lifting the block. Feeding the person who lifts the block, for a long time, nobody could answer it, because nobody had found where those people lived. Then, in 1988, an American archaeologist named Mark Leaner started digging in a patch of sand south of the Sphinx, at a place called Hayt el Ghurab, the Wall of the Crow. What came out of the ground was not a labor camp. It was a town. Long parallel galleries, laid out on a grid, big enough to sleep something like 2,000 workers at a time. Storerooms, a copper workshop, administrative buildings, and thousands of clay ceilings, the ancient equivalent of a signature on a delivery form. Radiocarbon dates put it right in the reigns of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, the three kings whose pyramids stand above it. And bakeries, industrial bakeries. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is the scale. The excavators pulled thousands of ceramic fragments out of that ground, pieces of a heavy bell-shaped pot the Egyptians called a beja. Some of these things weighed as much as 12 kilograms. Empty. Here's how they worked. The pots were stacked upside down over an open fire until they were glowing hot. The dough, soft and wet, was mixed in enormous vats and kneaded by foot, so hard that the vat bases cracked and had to be patched with slabs of limestone and granite. The dough went into the hot mold. A second hot mold went on top like a lid, and the whole thing was buried in ash and charcoal. The thick clay held the heat. The bread baked as the pot cooled. Claire Mallison, the archaeobotanist who directs archaeological science for the research team at Giza, worked out what one of those molds actually held. The largest size takes about 7.5 liters. That's around 4 kilograms of flour. One loaf, enough to feed 8 to 10 people. 15, if they had beer to go with it. And here's the detail that changes everything. The molds came in 3 standard sizes. Standard, deliberately, consistently standard. Ask yourself why anyone would bother standardizing the size of a loaf. Because money did not exist yet. There were no coins in Old Kingdom Egypt. There was no currency of any kind. The bread was the wage. The beer was the wage. If a man hauled stone for a month, what he took home was a measured quantity of food. And the only way to pay thousands of people fairly is to make the unit of payment exactly the same every time. The bread mold was a coin, and they weren't living on bread alone. The rubbish heaps at the workers' town have been picked through animal bone by animal bone, and the estimate that came out of that work is staggering. Something on the order of 5,000 cattle and 15,000 sheep and goats consumed every year. Roughly 4,000 pounds of meat, slaughtered daily on average. Not scraps, not old worn-out plow oxen at the end of their working lives. Prime young cattle. The good beef, which raises a question nobody likes the answer to. If these were slaves, why was the state feeding them like that? In 1990, Zahi Hawass began excavating the cemetery just west of that town, and found the builders themselves. Their skeletons carry the signature of the work in the most literal way possible. Compressed vertebrae, crushed downward by decades of carrying, arthritis in the joints, broken arms and broken lower legs, over and over. But most of those fractures had healed clean, with the bone properly realigned, which only happens if somebody set the break with a splint and kept the person alive while it knitted. 2 of the skeletons show amputation, 1 leg and 1 arm, with the bone ends healed over. Those men survived the surgery. And then they were buried in mud brick tombs, with grave goods, facing the pyramid they had helped raise. Nobody builds an eternal tomb for a slave. The written proof arrived much later, and from a direction nobody expected. In 2013, a French team led by Pierre Tallet was excavating an ancient harbor on the Red Sea coast, at Wadi al-Jarf, and pulled papyrus out of a sealed limestone gallery. It is the oldest inscribed papyrus ever found in Egypt. It's a logbook, It belonged to a middle-ranking official named Mirror, and it dates to the 26th year of Khufu's reign, when the Great Pyramid was being finished. Mirror ran a crew of about 40 men, ferrying fine white limestone from the Tura quarries downriver to the building site. His entries are almost boringly practical. Cast off in the morning, spend the night, load the stone. He records meeting a man named Ankhof, who happens to be Khufu's half-brother. And in among the shipping notes are the accounts. A boat is sent to Heliopolis to collect rations. It comes back with 40 sacks of bread, enough to feed the whole crew for a month. That is a payroll record, the oldest one on Earth, and it's a bread delivery. So picture the morning. It's barely light. The plateau is already loud. The bakery courtyard has been running since the middle of the night, and the air is thick with wood smoke and the sour smell of dough and the specific hot clay stink of 100 beja pots sitting in ash. A man walks up with a stick and pokes it into a mold to see whether the loaf inside is done. The line forms. Every man gets his measured bread. Every man gets his jar. And the jar is where the story goes sideways. Because here's what everyone believed for most of the 20th century. Egyptian beer was accidental bread. You baked a loaf, deliberately underbaked it, crumbled it into a jar of water, and let it ferment. Beer as a bread byproduct. It's drawn in tomb paintings. It's in every popular account. Then, in 1996, a researcher at Cambridge named Delwyn Samuel took desiccated beer residue out of ancient Egyptian vessels and put it under a scanning electron microscope and published what she saw in the journal Science. The starch granules were pitted, channeled, eaten away in a very specific pattern. That pattern is the fingerprint of malting. Soaking the grain, letting it sprout, then drying it. It is a controlled biochemical process, and it doesn't happen by accident in a jar of soggy bread. Some of the starch had been heated while wet, and some hadn't. Two separate streams, cooked and uncooked, blended together, then strained free of the husk before the yeast went in. That isn't baking gone wrong. That's brewing. Real, engineered, deliberate brewing, 4,500 years ago. And what it produced was nothing like what you'd order tonight. It was thick, cloudy, closer to a thin porridge than a pint, low in alcohol, and dense with calories and B vitamins. It was food you drank, which is exactly what you want to hand a man who is about to spend the day dragging limestone in 40-degree heat. So the pyramid rests on two grains, emmer and barley, run through two industries that were really one industry. Now go back to the teeth. The grain had to be ground, and it was ground on stone. Stone querns shed grit. Fine particles of sand and rock went into the flour and stayed there, baked into every loaf, and the Egyptian desert added more, blown in at the threshing floor, in the bakery, in the open courtyard. Every mouthful of that bread was faintly abrasive, a file disguised as lunch. The dental researcher Frank Fils-Leek made the case decades ago, and skulls across the whole span of Egyptian history back it up. The wear is severe. In many adults, the enamel is gone. The dentine underneath is gone. The crown's reduced by several millimeters, until the pulp chamber is exposed. An exposed pulp chamber in a world with no antibiotics means infection. Infection in the jaw means an abscess. And an abscess, often enough, meant death. That's the part that stays with you. The bread was their wage. The bread was their strength. It's the reason those galleries were full and those blocks kept arriving and the thing got finished at all. And the same bread was quietly filing their mouths down to the nerve. You will get paid this month, and you will spend some of it on food you didn't grow, prepared by people you'll never meet, in a system so large you can't see the edges of it. That's not a modern invention. It was invented on that plateau, with a clay pot and a standardized loaf, and it worked so well that it stacked 2.5 million blocks into the sky. It just came with a cost that nobody at the time could see, because it was too small to see. A grain of sand at a time. So run your tongue across your back teeth one more time. Those ridges are the ones he lost, not to the stone, to the thing that paid him.